we inform with facts, but we influence with emotion. And so if you're just looking to tell someone something about your university, the facts are all you need. But if you want them to feel something about your university, then you need to influence them. And the way to do that is to evoke an emotional reaction. And that only comes through storytelling, and good storytelling at that. Fine if you want to have your rankings and your news releases and stuff like that. And we do a ton of that too. But to influence, you're going to need emotion. And the way to do that is through storytelling all day long.
Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast on the B Podcast Network. This is a podcast dedicated to helping higher ed marketers tell better stories, create better content, and enroll more students. My name is John Azzoni. I'm the founder at Unveiled, and we're a video production company working specifically with college marketing teams on automating their student and alumni success stories through a subscription approach. If you're interested, you can learn more about that at unveiled.tv. That's UNVEILD. Or if you want to chat directly with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or find my contact info on the contact page of our website. If you're looking for me on LinkedIn, my last name is spelled A-Z-O-N-I. Also, if you want to create a deeper emotional impact with your institution's storytelling and content creation efforts, consider joining my newsletter. Every week, I send out a dose of insights and inspiration, things like case studies and best practices from other institutions, tips for creating content that resonates and inspires action, and that week's podcast episode, and more. So the link to sign up is in the show notes of this episode, or if you catch any of my posts on LinkedIn, chances are there will be a link in one of those posts. My guest today is Andy Fuller. Andy's the Executive Director of Brand Content at the University of Notre Dame, and in this episode, we go deep on the power of narrative ownership and storytelling to strengthen your university's brand. Key takeaways would be what narrative ownership is and why it's so important for universities to own the stories about their history, buildings, traditions, etc., rather than letting others shape that narrative. Andy shares great examples from Notre Dame's history, the process Notre Dame uses for identifying stories to tell, including social listening and checking mentions on social, tips for finding compelling stories and research breakthroughs, and conveying why your university matters to people through relatable examples. Also, we talk about advice for rolling out content across platforms, starting with internal audiences first. And we'll also give you a behind-the-scenes look at how Notre Dame's creative team works together to bring stories to life across mediums, the power of evoking emotions through stories versus just stating facts and stats. And Andy's key piece of advice: focus on telling your authentic stories first, irrespective of what other universities are doing. All right, so let's get into the show. Here's my conversation with Andy Fuller. Well, Andy, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
John, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start off the show by asking you, what's something that people would be surprised to know about you?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but if you recall, back when MTV was mostly about music, so early 2000s or so, they had a show called TRL. Total Request Live, right? Hosted by Carson Daly.
I remember it.
Yeah, good. Well, I made 2 appearances on TRL. One of them was a speaking role. I gave a shout out, as it was called. And in another episode, I actually got a t-shirt for being the wildest member of the studio audience. And I still have the t-shirt, and I did not wear it today, unfortunately. But yeah, most people who meet me, that is a surprising thing to learn. So MTV 2 appearances.
And did you get the t-shirt from Carson Daly?
No, no, it was one of the studio crew was like, this guy right here. And I'm like, oh, me? And I was with my college roommates at the time, and they were like, wow, this is crazy. And yeah, it was a fun time in New York, capped off by appearance on TRL. I went into television after that. So maybe that was actually the birth of my television career. I don't know, but
yeah,
it worked out.
That's awesome. That's cool. I used to come home from school every day. My sister and I would plop on the couch and watch TRL. And gosh, like I can't remember, like Limp Bizkit was out.
Oh yeah,
and like
there was
that kind of stuff.
I think my shout out was during a Blink 182 song or something like that.
Oh,
yeah. So it was, one of my friends did record the episode, and I think he's just holding it for like blackmail material for when I run for office or something like that. So yeah.
Oh, great. I love that story. Thanks for sharing
Yep.
that. All right, so you are the brand leader at Notre Dame. Tell us, what's your official title? Tell us about your role a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm executive director of brand content at Notre Dame. And actually, the brand content unit is a fairly new one, just kind of came together under its current iteration on July 1st. And basically, John, what we do is we help people care about Notre Dame and help explain why we matter. Because ultimately, that's what your brand is. It's why people should care about you and why you matter. And we try to orient our storytelling and our content around like those two big goals: make people care, tell them why we matter.
That's awesome. I like that. So tell me about your team. What's your team layout look like?
Yep. So I have social media. So if you think about like at Notre Dame on Twitter, at Notre Dame on Instagram, like the main social media for the university is on our team. We have a couple people doing that. We have some videographers, some photographers, a writer. We also source writing from around campus. And then a web designer and a content specialist whose job is not only to kind of produce and package content, but also look at analytics, tell us how we're performing, how we can optimize, things like that. So got a multidisciplinary team of 11, but then we kind of attach ourselves to other units either on campus or within our division. And then of course we are much bigger when we do that. So we do a lot of stories, a lot of long form storytelling on indy.edu. If you think about the university's central digital presence, I mean, that's kind of where we spend a lot of our time. So a lot of photo, video, social, things like that. What you would normally think of in terms of brand content and storytelling.
Yeah, what platforms are you guys most active on right now?
Yeah, I mean, other than like the main, web properties, Instagram is one that we just can't spend enough time there. Really, we're seeing a ton of engagement, and it's interesting. As we're recording this, it feels like Instagram is swinging the pendulum back to Reels. It kind of was there a while. Then they were like, well, no, we're really about still images again, and now it's coming back to Reels. So that video, component of our portfolio just continues to be really super important. So Instagram is a big one. We're looking at TikTok. Obviously, that's we're not there yet, but we're very interested in studying that and wondering what the university presence there looks like. We're on Threads. The first night that it launched, our social media manager hopped on, grabbed the Notre Dame handle, and we've been doing a fair amount there as well. So, those are some of the main social platforms. We of course have a presence on Facebook as well. But the one thing that we're really looking to do more in is YouTube. It's kind of forgotten sometimes, and it sounds kind of an obvious thing, but YouTube, I think I read, is now the biggest podcasting platform out there. And so, we need to pay really close attention to YouTube and how to maximize that for us as well. So we're as busy as we want to be, kind of keeping those plates spinning on the various platforms.
That's cool. Yeah, YouTube, for this podcast, I've been very involved with YouTube, but kind of passively, like not like really trying to game the system or SEO, whatever, but just kind of taking snippets from the podcast as well as full episodes and putting them on YouTube and YouTube Shorts. And it's been, I've got some clips have, taken off relative to anything else that has not taken off, for me. So taken off to me is like 1,000, 1,500 views,
right?
Something like that. And
that's great. That's great. Our podcast, it's Notre Dame Stories is our podcast, and we've been doing it for about 5 years. And, I always try to temper my expectations of streams and downloads and stuff like that because, at the end of the day, if you have someone listening to you for 25 minutes, a half hour, whatever the episode is, that's a long time to spend with a brand. And, I feel like that means something. Yeah. And it can mean more than just a like, or something like that. So the fact that they're interacting with your content for that amount of time, I think is significant. So I think that's great.
Yeah, even and I try to keep that in mind too with all social media. Like people are listening, to you. And I remember when I started really posting content regularly on LinkedIn, I was always just like, man, like nobody likes any of this stuff. No one comments and stuff like that. But then I would like see people I know, like from the business world, like in person, they'd be like, "Oh, I love what you're doing on LinkedIn. I'm like seeing your stuff." So like those impressions do matter,
Right.
And people I think you just have to earn it a little more on LinkedIn, like with engagement. Like it takes a lot more than like the Facebook, where it's like your family and friends and stuff like that. But people, yeah. I mean, and I know it's the same thing with like this podcast too. Like it's growing and growing, but if you look at the back end numbers versus like my experience in meeting new people who have already heard about, like that's how I met you, was I reached out to you and you're like, "Oh, I already listened."
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, "Oh, well, cool."
Yeah.
So a few of those 1,500 or whatever, you never know. They're like people in the industry and the folks you want to reach. So.
Yeah, for sure. Anyways, yeah. So and for YouTube, I just heard too, for storytelling. I mean, we can incorporate this later, but the Shorts is just has released a way that you can now connect the short videos to a long form video. So I just think that's a cool opportunity for universities that are doing a lot of storytelling to take their long form thing, cut it up into a bunch of small little teasers, and then point to the long thing. I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be cool.
No, you're exactly right. And we've kind of been doing that in a less efficient way already. So for YouTube to sort of reduce some of that friction from going from platform to platform is really going to be helpful. You just got to find the hands and the time to work on it. And that's the challenge for everyone, I think.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I talked to Darren Rubinik from, he's at University of Central Missouri on the podcast, and we were just talking about how just like social media overwhelm and threads coming out, and it's like reaching this tipping point where it's like, oh my gosh, it's just like, we feel like we need like 3 or 4 different social media managers to just like, just pay attention to these different algorithms.
Yeah.
It can be exhausting.
At Notre Dame, we were an army of one. We had one person dedicated to central social media until July 1st, and then we hired our second. So she Liz is her name, our social media manager. She was burning it at both ends quite a bit, and as you said, the proliferation and the expansion of these platforms doesn't stop. And so if someone's making a hire, I would really look strongly at that area as the area of most growth and most engagement for your university.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we got you on here to talk about this idea of narrative ownership. And so Notre Dame has a great history of storytelling, and there's a lot of historical stories that come along with the university's brand. And so you were telling me earlier about this idea of narrative ownership. What is that? How do you guys like talk about that on your team?
Yeah, sure. So narrative ownership it sounds very simple, and it is technically. It's this idea that for every university, I mean, Notre Dame, of course, but I think honestly, every university, big or small, has these pieces of information or these bits of narrative out there about them that most often live in the public consciousness in part. And it's up to us, I think, as kind of stewards of the brand to give a full accounting for whatever it is that people are telling, in part out there on the web. I'll give you an example of how this kind of started for us. There's this Twitter account, X account, called Uber Facts. I don't even know if they're still around, but this was a while ago. We were looking through our mentions, and Uber Facts said, "Did you know that in the 1920s, a group of Notre Dame students broke up a KKK rally, Ku Klux Klan rally, and drove them out of South Bend?" And I saw that, and I said, "Well, that's our story to tell." Great that you want to talk about the university, but that's a piece of our history. So why don't we provide the accounting of that story? And so our writer looked into it and developed this sort of longish form piece that's on indy.edu now. It's called "Clash Over Catholicism," because as people kind of rightly remember the KKK for their racism, but they were also very anti-Catholic, and that was kind of the friction that our students at the time saw coming to South Bend. The Klan was very big in Indiana in the 1920s. And they were having a rally in South Bend. And long story short, our students, it was an all-boys school at the time, Notre Dame was, and as boys tend to do, they get themselves maybe a little worked up. And so they went downtown, and long story short, a fight breaks out. There's fisticuffs. And our students kind of roughed up the Klan members, even ripped like robes and hats off of some of them to keep as trophies. So it was this kind of weird piece of Notre Dame history. And I don't want to overstate the importance of that incident, but it was kind of a high water mark for the KKK in Indiana. After that incident, their power really started to subside in the state. And so, and again, that's not necessarily because of our students or whatever, but it is kind of an interesting thing to document in Notre Dame's history. And so that continues to be one of our most viewed stories month after month. And it's this piece of Notre Dame lore that, again, people are talking about out there, but maybe they don't know the whole story. Or maybe more obviously, they're getting the information from someplace other than your domain. If it's not coming from an nd.edu website, I kind of feel a responsibility to correct that as the leader of brand content. So that's kind of where the idea started. We also have a story called What's in a Name, and it tells the lineage, the history of why we're called the Fighting Irish. And that one, again, month to month becomes one of our most viewed stories because sports mascots and nicknames, every so often there's a conversation about what's appropriate and what's not. And frequently Notre Dame is mentioned in that. Well, what's with the Fighting Irish? And I don't want to give any spoilers, but basically, the Irish name at the time we started playing sports was actually a derogatory term for Catholics or immigrants. And a lot of our students were Irish immigrants or obviously Catholic. And the story is about how we kind of turned that into a positive. We kind of took it on as a sort of badge of honor, if you will. And what those two stories do for us is they help build a little more brand affinity. It's not a heavy research piece. It's not, hey, we have a breakthrough on this thing that really matters to people. It's you're getting to know the university a little better. Most people, I think, when they think of Notre Dame, the words, blue collar or hard nosed don't necessarily aren't necessarily top of mind, but that's in our history. That's definitely our roots. And these two stories help shape that a little bit. Our main thing is if you get to know us a little better, our bet is that you will get to like us a little better. So you'll have this brand affinity. And that will increase our reach so that when we do need to talk about the breakthroughs that we're close to on peanut allergies, when you need to know that Notre Dame matters because we're making transplant organs viable for longer so that people who need those procedures have a better shot at making it. You're going to hear that because you've already developed this affinity and you've already kind of engaged with a piece of content that is, not really about our research or our global presence or something like that, but just makes you like us a little more. So that's kind of the bigger strategy of narrative ownership. And we got another major one going on right now related to the Dome as well. But that's kind of the genesis and where we've seen narrative ownership take place for us.
That's awesome. I love that. And in knowing that you were on TRL, I already like you more. So,
exactly.
We're seeing this in action right now. So the peanut allergies, I want to hear more about that. Because here's the thing, I think when people think, when a marketing team is thinking, okay, we got to tell our story or we got to tell stories, I think the default is to go to what's the broader narrative of the college, or what are the values and things like that. Or maybe it's let's tell some stories about our students or alumni and stuff like that. But I think something that's often really overlooked, which I find really interesting on YouTube, I watch a lot of these videos, is what's being researched and how can I learn about a subject through your university, and then what are you doing with that information right now? Totally bad example because I can't remember the university. Oh no, it was University of Chicago. They did the history of sleep.
Yeah.
And like sleep studies and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And it really just, it's just something cool that's happening and that you can own, like, and it's a way of saying, like, not just saying like we have world-class professors, but it's like, here's an example of like cool stuff that we're doing. So anyway, but I'm interested in the peanut allergies because that's always fascinated me. I've never seen so many allergies. When I turned 30, I developed an egg allergy. It was just like a gift from the, it was just like, oh, you're 30 now? Here you go. Here's your allergies. Here's some back pain.
Happy birthday. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I sneezed and now I'm out for a week. And yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. A peanut allergy. So we profiled this, I think, most fully in a series we call "What Would You Fight For?" So we're the Fighting Irish. We have this series that airs at halftime of home football broadcasts called "What Would You Fight For?" And the peanut allergy was with a professor, I believe in engineering, who developed a way to sort of inhibit the process by which the body reacts to a peanut and recognizes it as an allergen and something to get rid of. Because that's ultimately what happens with people with a severe peanut allergy. And so, that and then the heart transplant thing, that is back to your brand, why you matter to people. And I think that's what it comes back to for universities. It's one thing to tout your stats. It's one thing to say, this percentage of our student body was in the top 5% of their class or whatever it is. That's all great. Those can be kind of secondary reasons to believe, but why you matter, why people should care about you, ultimately you got to strike them kind of in the core, in the heart. And the way you do that is through relatability. So I think, the story about the KKK, the story about the Fighting Irish, that has elements of relatability to it. And now you're talking kind of institutionally, oh, Notre Dame is a place that actually is a little more relatable than I thought. And by the way, I care about them because I have a nephew who has a peanut allergy, or, my uncle needs a heart transplant. And Notre Dame matters because they're helping someone with my greatest need in life. And that's why you matter. That's what your brand is to people. That's why they should care about you. It's not so much about your academic prowess. It's more about what are you doing with that knowledge? How are you helping people with the knowledge that you're creating and what you're studying? And that comes back to our mission. And it's not just a Notre Dame thing. That many universities can say this clearly. But for us, it's that knowledge for good, force for good in the world, which is very much in our founding. And that's why people should care. Ultimately, it's great that you have cool buildings. It's great that your football team is ranked. I think we're 18th as we're recording this. That's all cool. But if you can't meet people where they are, if you can't show how your university is solving someone's critical need that they feel very personally, then ultimately you're not going to get a ton of traction, and you're not going to have the brand reputation that you seek.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the culturally relevant conversations for a university to jump into is kind of a more goofy side. There's I don't know if listeners know who Mark Rober is, but he's an engineer. And if anyone's ever seen Andy, have you seen the glitter bomb video?
Yes.
Where okay, so that's Mark Rober. So he's getting packages stolen from off his porch, and so he is this brilliant engineer and came up with this this gag. So when someone stole it, they would open it, it would spray like fart spray and then spray glitter everywhere, and it just keeps I think they're on like the third iteration of this, and it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. But I just think that's not like that's a really high academic thing to do, but I always remember his videos because they're experiments on little real life things. Like my kids love to go to Chuck E. Cheese. I actually love it too.
Confessions. So, yes, we love it.
Yeah. Yeah. They always want to go swimming, to the pool or stuff. And I'm like, right. Can we just go to Chuck E. Cheese? That's just something in it for everybody there, But he did a video where Mark Rober did a video. There's a machine where that light kind of goes around and around, and you got to stop it right on the arrow or whatever, and then you get that, and then you get the jackpot. And he created a mechanism where it would automate like it like timed it perfectly. And so he explained engineering through that. I'm like, this is so interesting because it's like this really, if you were to just explain engineering,
Right.
it's too academic. But if you were to take something that's just kind of silly and interesting, I mean, like I always remember that whenever I go to
Yeah,
Chuck E. Cheese.
right. And that's there's a lot of ways to look at storytelling, just kind of broadly, right? But I think the most helpful one is to try to put your audience as the main character in the story, which means like, how are they viewing this? How can they see this in their life, if you will? And you mentioned sleep. We've done a piece on sleep too with a researcher here who talks about what the mind does when you're asleep at night. And that's stuff that, again, people are really interested in because that's right where they live, right? I did not get enough sleep last night. Might have been coming back from LA, for example, hypothetically. But everyone can relate to a lack of sleep because we're chronically under in that category as Americans, I think. So, even if it's not, peanut allergies or heart transplants, something that's, really huge and heavy, but just how are you going to help people in their everyday life? That matters so much to people. If someone can see your brand fitting into their life and what they care about in just kind of the day-to-day moments, man, not just in higher ed, but generally, that's where a brand really gets traction and starts to occupy real estate in someone's heart and mind.
Yeah. And I think too, just like, it's easy to think when you're okay, we need to do more storytelling, so we're gonna talk about us.
Right.
We're gonna talk about what's our story, what's stuff that people will be cool to know about us, and you should have those things. There should be, you should have those kind of narratives, but also it's like it's the power of inviting people into a story, and you can think about storytelling like, where are we making an impact, and let's tell the story of the impact or the story of the mission, and just through learning that, like we know that this is brought to you by this brand. And yeah, I think I sent out my newsletter a week or two ago. It was law school, and I'm blanking on the law school, but it was a whole video just about this impact that they're making. They're like inviting people into this impact that you can have as a lawyer and be part of this mission. And I just thought that was like, that's cool. That's a way to like show your value rather than just tell it,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think what you said is right. I mean, people tend to be focused on themselves, but the problem is they always go to the stats, that they want to highlight, and they don't go to, well, why do we matter? And in the case of those lawyers, I mean, hopefully they are using their knowledge to help someone who needs help, and that's why ultimately universities matter,
right,
in this world. So yeah, it's there's more to it than just kind of some flashy way to say what your ranking is.
Right. Yeah. There's always, I think storytelling is almost more powerful in the individual specific examples. And I think I think more people need to understand the power of getting specific, because that's where all the emotion lies. Like when you're telling just kind of a story of like this broad thing, it's fine. But it's like when you talk about how that made you feel, or an example, something that happened that illustrates what you're trying to say, it's like just so much more engaging.
Boy, you're 100% right. I gave a talk a little while ago on storytelling, and one of the things I say is that we inform with facts, but we influence with emotion. And so if you're just looking to tell someone something about your university, then the facts are all you need. But if you want them to feel something about your university, then you need to influence them. And the way to do that is to evoke an emotional reaction. And that only comes through storytelling, and good storytelling at that. Fine if you want to have, your rankings and your news releases and stuff like that. And we do a ton of that too. But to influence, you're going to need emotion. And the way to do that is through storytelling all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick break here to tell you how you can scale up your student and alumni success stories without taking on a bunch of extra work to manage with Unveiled's video storytelling subscriptions. Have you ever felt that nagging feeling of discouragement in the pit of your stomach and that voice that says you're not doing enough? You're not doing enough to tell your institution's story. You're not posting video content consistently enough to your audience. You're not showing up in their feeds regularly. You're not highlighting student outcomes in as compelling of a way as you'd want. Your program landing pages are dinosaurs. They're just big walls of text, and you know that nobody's reading all that. The dream of having a regular cadence of quality student success stories and other video content that is driving enrollment results is a far cry from where you are now. Maybe your team is already overloaded, or you don't have the resources, the time, the talent, the money to really show up for prospective students with digital content and reach that stage in your school's content strategy. I get it. Video marketing is hard. I'm a videographer myself. I know how to make videos. I can make myself whatever videos I want, whenever I want. And yet I was regularly feeling the weight of not showing up for my audience consistently enough until I invested in a content engine, a process that would feed my business video content always without having to think much about it. A process that largely runs by itself and saves me from having to come up with an endless supply of video content to produce from scratch to inspire my audience. For me, that content engine came in the form of this podcast, specifically the video version of this podcast, and it solved a lot of that nagging feeling for me. But there are other content engines. There's another way to build this engine, and it's the primary way that we at Unveiled work with colleges and universities. It's a way that we help institutions regularly tell compelling student and alumni success stories that inspire and influence prospective students and increase enrollment without having to manage a bajillion video projects one by one from scratch all year long. I'm talking about our video storytelling subscriptions. When you work with Unveiled, we're going to film a year's worth of content, and then every month we're going to drip out a new student or alumni success story along with a package of 10 additional videos repurposed from that story that you can use in various ways to promote your school. Plus, we're going to give you all that B-roll and interview footage as part of your subscription so you can repurpose that content in an unlimited amount of ways without having to go film anything. You'll just have a growing library of commercial quality video assets that you can use any way you want, including pull still images from them. And the best part is we've designed this process to run successfully without you needing to babysit it. Just do some upfront work and then let the process run how it's supposed to. Wait for the stories to appear in your inbox like magic, and all you got to do from there is distribute them. So if you want to know how this process works on a more granular level, how we get all this content, what's required of your team, what other schools' experiences have been like with this process of working with us, how much it all costs, all that, go to pricing.unveiled.tv and download our free pricing guide. Unveiled is spelled Unveiled. And there's also a link in the show notes you can click on. And if you have any questions, you can book a call with me on our website, and I'd love to personally walk you through what this could look like for your institution. So that's pricing.unveiled.tv. And now back to the episode. Going back to this idea of narrative ownership, where are you guys finding the stories to tell? Because in our pre-interview you mentioned like you guys do a lot of listening and social listening and things. Let's talk about the social listening part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Uber Facts thing, which was a big one for us. And I think the other one with the Why We Call the Fighting Irish, I think there was an anchor on ESPN who wondered aloud whether Fighting Irish was appropriate. And so, it sounds very obvious, John, but honestly, a lot of it's just going through your mentions, whatever platform you have to kind of capture that, just kind of going through and saying, is there something here that, not that we want to respond to every story opportunity, right? But is there something here that helps the brand a little bit? And is clearly something that people we think would respond to, and where those two kind of things intersect, kind of our gut feel for what makes a good story, and would it elevate the brand, and are people talking about it without us? Then we think we might have a story. The other way to kind of get at these is what's happening in the life of your university. And as we're recording this, we're undergoing a pretty major storytelling rollout around our most recognizable campus landmark, which is the main building, better known to everyone else as the Golden Dome. And for the first time in 18 years, the dome and the statue of Mary at the top are being regilded. And just stop there and think about this. This didn't happen since 2005. And you think about what storytelling and content looked like in 2005, a very different world now. So we thought this was an opportunity to really capitalize on something that has happened about a dozen times in the life of the university, but never with this amount of platforms and tools to kind of tell the story. So we've got out the drones, we've been up there with the scaffolding to really kind of document this process, because our bet is if you know the story of the main building, if you know the dome, you'll know Notre Dame. It is a microcosm for the university's history and reputation and just kind of what its mission is. And so we took this opportunity to kind of build some of that out. So why is there a dome here? Why did they put a statue of Mary at the top? And what was the dome's history? And if you understand that, I think you'll understand Notre Dame a little more. And again, I think you'll have a little more affinity. I mean, we draw you in with the pretty pictures because it is really stunning work that's being done, and there's access that you don't get from the ground. I mean, our photographers are up there, high in the air, kind of doing this work, and we're using that opportunity to tell you more about university. So really strong visuals as kind of a hook, but then, hey, read a little more and you understand that this was a place for immigrants and kind of blue collar folks to find a home. At the start. And a lot of students actually paid their way by working on campus buildings at the start. And you wouldn't think about that about Notre Dame now. I don't think we have those scholarships anymore. But, and sure enough, in our first iteration of this sort of storytelling package, our photo essay platform saw a 900% increase relative to average in terms of users. We had what we would call a statistical anomaly in terms of page views to nd.edu. So it's clearly something that our audience was interested in, wanted to know more about. And so there's kind of an innate knowledge. I've been at the university for 11 years, and you kind of build that a little bit. Like, this is what I think would work for our audience. And then capitalizing when you may not have another opportunity. And, if I'm here in 18 years, great, and I'm happy to do this reguild thing again, but, I may not be. And so I wanted to we wanted to really kind of capitalize on the opportunity to kind of own that narrative around, certainly our most recognizable campus landmark and a building that I think most people would recognize if they saw a picture of it too.
Yeah, and how do you roll these stories out? Like, what's the campaign look like once you have one of these? So
the first iteration of the reguild was kind of interesting. Our internal comms director, Jenna Liberto, she actually said, why don't we roll this out to the internal audience first? They're the ones who are seeing this every day, and they're kind of wondering what's going on, and it was really the right strategy all day long. So we rolled it out internally first. And then not long after that, I think even same day, we rolled it out on social first. And kind of like what you were saying with YouTube Shorts, these short snippets that lead you back to the long form. I mean, that was kind of how we've done business for a long time, and that's what we did here. Our social engagement was, I think, 12%. Our engagement rate, which is double what we normally get. We do pretty well there anyway, but that's double what we normally get. So it was kind of that internal audience first, and then the public outlay. This next iteration, which should hit this week as we're recording this, will probably be external facing first, and then maybe internal following that. Normally, our storytelling is posted on nd.edu first, and then we kind of come in with our social to point there. So it's a very common strategy. We're not doing anything overly difficult or revolutionary there, but it's working. I mean, frequently and consistently, our main referral source is our social media channels all day long, and so that's working for us, and we're kind of sticking with it.
That's cool. And you mentioned you have a writer. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the play between, does somebody write a script and then your videographers go out, or is it like interview based? Like, tell me about the play between the different roles in the storytelling.
Yeah, it's really interesting because our designated writer, is mostly just working on long form content. He's a journalist by trade. A lot of us in the higher ed communications community are. And so, he kind of uses those skills to find interesting stories and bring in the human element and stuff like that. So he's a trained journalist and he does that very well. When it comes to scripting videos, honestly, for the most part, we leave that to our videographers. We say, here are the three things. We're a lot of times me or someone else from our team is there for the interview to kind of have another set of ears. And then we kind of say, here's the three things that I heard that should make it into the piece. Other than that, just make it fit. Mm-hmm. We give them a lot of leeway and creative control over their work that way, and that's worked very well. We've not seen a need to have a script sort of fleshed out in any real and complete sense most of the time. Now, if we're doing something that's not like a narrative package and is more like our 30-second institutional spot, which we are working on right now, which will air during all of our sports broadcasts, then we do have, I wrote the script for that one this year, and then we do kind of have like a storyboard type technique. But in the day-to-day, we don't normally get into that. We just kind of let the videographers do their thing.
Does your internal team handle like the bigger stuff too, like the commercials?
Yeah, so we do that all in house. We have gone out for like voiceover before, but this year's I think will be 100% in house. We come up with the idea, we write it, we shoot it, sometimes on location, and that means various locations where Notre Dame has a presence in the world. So yeah, our internal team has taken the lead on that. Boy, I want to say for the last maybe 8 years or so. It's been quite a while since we've gone outside for that particular piece.
Yeah. And I talked to a lot of marketing directors that, about like an asset library, a B-roll library, picture library, whatever. And that's a big problem that I think, we see is that, especially if you're going to go tell stories, like historical stories, tell us about how you guys address that problem or solve it. Like, do you guys have archives somewhere? Is it organized? Is that kind of just the Wild West and you're trying to figure it out right now? Or
it's somewhere in between. I don't know if it's the Wild West, but it's not very settled, I would say. We have a great university archives department here who is very helpful. Like, hey, we need this footage of whatever it was, Dwight Eisenhower, coming to campus or whatever, and they're usually great with kind of locating that and finding it. We have to get creative other times. If we know that we have to show an old time lab and it needs to be a video thing, then we're staging for dramatic effect. There's a little bit of an art form. It's not just pure journalism that we're trying to execute on here. So we'll do what's needed for that. We've at times used, if we just have a still image, but it's a really compelling one, we've done the Ken Burns thing, the pan and stuff like that. I don't do that a ton. But for the most part, what we need, we have. We're always, and now I think we're kind of turning our attention here again to update our campus B-roll library. We're building a lot of new facilities on campus, some high-end research stuff that is going to be important for us to kind of document and see, because you'll need that look and feel in a story from time to time. And so that's kind of the main thing that we're still always grabbing. The historical stuff, we have some help with university archives. Other than that, we're kind of staging.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. What would be your charge or your advice to other schools, small or big, that maybe have stories like these to tell? What would you advise to other people?
Yeah. I think it does go back to narrative ownership. And here's the thing. I think in higher ed, we're so interested in differentiation. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times where that sort of exercise goes is the comparison game. We're not like State U because ABC, and so we need to we need to tell that story. I'm someone who believes differentiation will never come through comparison. I think you got to know yourself intimately first, and then tell those stories that are, here's just us. Don't worry about anyone else. Here's just us. And you got to trust that presenting yourself compellingly will attract the right people to your university. So it comes with finding, and we've talked about ways to kind of find those stories, some of which are kind of no-brainers. But tell your own story first, irrespective of what everyone else is doing and what everyone else looks like. Tell you for you and be in your character. And I think you got a better shot at success that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. The first episode of this podcast was all about that, differentiating through storytelling. And I think I 100% agree with you. I think you're spot on that. Like, at a certain point, there's only so many words to describe a higher education experience.
Yeah.
People are coming out of high school or maybe going back to school as adults. And they're learning something so that they can advance their lives, advance their careers, make an impact on the world. Okay, so there's thousands and thousands of schools, only so many words to use to describe different ways that you do that.
Exactly.
So the differentiation, by comparison is tough. But like those stories, it's really just kind of a natural differentiator, is telling stories that only exist for you, and they might exist in a similar way somewhere else. Like, someone, did something cool, got a cool award, got a cool job, whatever. But those stories might exist other places too. But like no other school can claim that story and that emotional connection that you've created through telling that story. And I think that's why, like, so much money is probably invested on having marketing consultants come in and try to pick the right words and things like that. But and that's important. I mean, you should get clear on your audience. I did have a story that came out about Walsh College here in Michigan, how in partnership with them they had a change of leadership. They got really clear on who their student is that they're going after, and then they told the story, and it was like those two combined, learning who they're not for was important, and then they were able to increase enrollment by over 40%, by getting specific like that. But at a certain point, there's also, you kind of got to break away from that and be like, all right, just what's going on here that's compelling.
Well, I think that's a great example, and I think what you said something really important there, because regardless of who you are, I mean, whether you're Notre Dame, whether you're Walsh, I went to a small liberal arts school called Bethel University, which is here in Mishawaka. Whatever size you are, you're always trying to attract the right student. I mean, there are universities, and I would say Notre Dame's probably one of them. They don't need volume of people, but everyone's looking for the right people, regardless of who you are, to come to your institution. And so being authentic and kind of raising that flag, like, here's who we are, and if you resonate with this, hey, check us out, I think is something everyone is after, including Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people connect with you at? Yeah,
so I am on Threads, Andy_Fuller, and then same handle on Instagram as well, and then Andy Fuller on LinkedIn.
How is your PS follow-up question here? How's your personal experience on Threads been with that Andy Fuller account?
Yeah, I've liked it. I think it's funny. There's some sorting that needs to happen, because you import your Instagram following automatically, and the people you follow on Instagram, you're not interested in a Twitter-like experience from them. So there's been some sorting and trying to get what was my Twitter community, to be replicated on Threads, and we're still sorting through that. I think overall the platform is fine. It largely does what it needs to do. It feels like, and believe it or not, Zuck does not care what I think, but it feels like they need to iterate a little more quickly, I think, to stick with some of the momentum they have. But for me personally, I love it. I think it's been great.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Awesome. Well, it's been great. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for listening. 3 things I want to give you before you go. Number 1, reminder to go to pricing.unveiled.tv if you're interested in our subscriptions and download our pricing guide. Also, number 2, reminder to sign up for my weekly newsletter for insights on creating deeper emotional impact with your institution's storytelling and content creation efforts. And number 3, would love for you to leave a review for this podcast. It helps me out a ton. Thanks for listening. My name is John Azzoni. Go connect with me on LinkedIn. And in the meantime, I'll catch you on the next episode of the Higher Ed Storytelling University Podcast. Thanks.